Welcome to Crash Course Injury Law with Joe Ghabour.
Welcome back to Crash Course Injury Law with Joe Ghabour, founder of Joseph M. Ghabour and Associates. Joe is a personal injury attorney licensed in New Jersey, New York, and Florida who helps accident victims understand how insurance coverage actually works when the other driver doesn't have enough or any insurance at all. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're talking about uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage and why it plays such a critical role in New Jersey accident cases. Joe, can you explain what uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage is and why it's so important in New Jersey?
Uninsured motorists or UM coverage and underinsured motorists or UIM coverage are parts of your own auto insurance policy that protect you when the driver at fault in an accident either has no insurance or doesn't have enough insurance to cover your losses. If someone causes a crash and has no insurance, your UM coverage, which is uninsured coverage, steps in. If they have insurance but their limits are too low to fully compensate you, your UIM coverage bridges the gap up to the limits you've selected on your policy. Without adequate UM or UIM coverage, you could be left paying out of pocket for someone else's negligence.
So when someone is hit by a driver who has no insurance or very low limits, how does UM or UIM coverage step in?
If the at-fault driver has no insurance, your UM coverage will pay the damages that the other driver would have owed you. Basically, your UM insurer, which is your own insurance company, they act as if though they are the insurance company of the at-fault driver, and they will provide coverage up to the UM limits that you have chosen on your policy. If a driver has insurance but has minimal insurance limits, and that doesn't cover all of your losses, your UIM coverage may provide additional compensation once the other driver's policy limits are exhausted. So in essence, it would act as a second insurer for the at-fault driver. It would cover you up to the limit of your UIM policy minus whatever coverage the at-fault driver had.
So many people don't realize that their own policy can become the source of compensation. What are some of the most common misunderstandings you see about this type of coverage?
Well, there are extremes of misunderstandings. Some people assume that the UM UIM coverage automatically pays for everything. It doesn't. It is limited to the coverage amount that you purchased on your own policy. Another misunderstanding is assuming that your UIM or UM limits automatically match your liability limits. That is not always the case either. You must actively, and I say this very, very clearly, you must actively select the higher limits to fully protect yourself. The limits for UM or UIM can be equal to your liability limits, but they could also be less. It can never be more, however, than your liability limits. So I suggest that you match your liability limits when you obtain your UM and UIM coverage.
So what kind of situations typically trigger a UM or UIM claim, and how do you determine whether the at-fault driver's coverage isn't enough?
Well, UM is generally triggered by things such as a hit and run accident where there is no defendant, or it's someone who is driving but doesn't have insurance. That's really when your uninsured motorist coverage comes into place, where there is no defendant or the person driving doesn't have any insurance at all. So in New Jersey, you could be involved in an accident with a driver who has a dollar a day policy, which in essence provides absolutely no coverage. In fact, if you get involved in an accident with a person who has a dollar a day policy, your own insurance company is going to deem the other driver uninsured. And if they deem the other driver uninsured, then your UM coverage will kick in. In contrast to UIM coverage is triggered if the damages that you've sustained exceed the other driver's policy limits. And that happens a lot. So in New Jersey, the minimum liability limits as of January 1st, 2026 went up from $25,000 per person and $50,000 per accident to $35,000 per person and $70,000 per accident. So if your damages exceed the minimum liability limits of $35,000 and the other driver only has $35,000, but you have a UIM policy of $100,000, you can get whatever excess damages you're entitled to from your own insurance company. So let's say, for argument's sake here, you have damages worth $100,000 and the other driver has $35,000. You would obtain $35,000 from the defendant driver, and then your UIM coverage would kick in the additional $65,000 in coverage, which would bring you up to the $100,000 limit that you have chosen. You can never go more than the limit that you have in UIM. So it's very important, and it can definitely come in handy if you're sustained serious injuries and the other driver doesn't have sufficient coverage.
So what tends to make these claims difficult? Is it the insurance company response, the documentation, or something else?
Truth be said, insurance companies are not in the business of paying out claims. They're in the business of protecting you, et cetera, and all the good stuff that we see on the commercials on TV, but they would rather not pay out claims at all. So if there is any way that they can avoid paying out a claim, they will take it. So it's very important that you have proper medical documentation. It's very important that you have proper documentation in general as it relates to how the accident took place, who was involved in the accident, all the doctors that you've treated with, all the diagnostic tests that you've undertaken. So you have to have documentation in order for you to be able to prove to them that you're injured enough to get either UM or UIM coverage.
Joe, is there a case that stands out where UM or UIM coverage made a major difference for someone who would have otherwise been left with nothing?
There are many cases. We've handled many cases where the injuries were substantial and the defendant driver had minimal insurance or no insurance at all. So I can't, stress how important having proper UM or UIM coverage is. A lot of times people don't realize that when they're obtaining a policy, it is actually a contract between you and the insurance company. So make sure that you have sufficient coverage in the event that you sustain a serious injury.
So without naming names or too specific details, can you give us a more succinct example?
Sure. We recently had a case where the defendant where our client was driving a vehicle and was struck by another driver who was at fault completely, and that driver had a $25,000 policy. Unfortunately, our client was severely injured and needed a lot of treatment. We were able to go through his underinsured motorist coverage, and we got an additional $620,000 for him through his policy. He had a commercial policy. So it makes a difference. Our client was seriously injured, needed the compensation to get his life, together. And the other driver only had $25,000 in coverage, was otherwise judgment proof, which means he had no assets or nothing that we would be able to seek for compensation from our client other than his insurance policy. So it comes in handy if you have a proper UIM. We had another case where our client was struck by a drunk driver, and that drunk driver only had a $15,000 policy. That was back when $15,000 was the state minimum. And our client, broke his leg in several places, was hospitalized for a substantial period of time. He had a $250,000 UIM policy, so we were able to get him an additional $235,000 on top of the $15,000 from the defendant driver for a total compensation package of $250,000. Still not sufficient, but that was the maximum that he had on his UIM policy, so we were able to utilize that to get him proper compensation.
So for someone who's unsure whether they even have this coverage, what's the best way to review their policy and get clarity early?
The easiest way is to look at your declaration page. The declaration page is the piece of paper that you get from the insurance company when you purchase or renew your insurance policy. I'm not talking about the proof of insurance or the insurance card that we keep in the car to show to the police in the event that we are pulled over. I am actually talking about the page that tells you what your coverages are and how much they cost. You must review your declaration page. As it pertains to UM or UIM coverage, you must look for the section that is entitled Underinsured or Uninsured Motorist coverage. They're usually combined in one line item on your declaration page. Check the limits listed. While you're at it, you should also check the limits of your liability. Because like I said earlier, you can have the same limits as your liability or less for UIM or UM. You can't have more. So you should always obtain a policy with the best limits that you can afford. If you're unsure of what you have, contact your insurance agent or speak with an attorney to review your policy. My office would be more than happy to review your policy for you, advise you of your coverages, and make our recommendations as to what kind of coverages you should have. And of course, the time to do so is before an accident, not after. After an accident, it's too late to change anything.
Indeed, the policy kicks in exactly as it is at the moment of the accident. Am I right?
Absolutely. So whatever coverages you have at the time of the accident, that's what's going to carry through. You could always change it after, but it's not going to be effective for the accident that took place already. It's going to be for the next time.
So as we wrap up here, and if someone realizes that the other driver doesn't have enough insurance, when should they reach out for help so that the claim doesn't fall apart later?
Well, I always recommend that you reach out to an attorney as soon as possible. And the reason I say this is because you need to understand what your rights are and how to protect them. Very simply, the longer you wait to find out what your rights are, the more likely you are to have those rights trampled on. So, for example, if the defendant's insurance company calls you and asks for a recorded statement, you're not under any obligation to give them a recorded statement or, in fact, to talk to them at all. They don't tell you that. They want to get as much information from you so that they can use it against you later on. So if you reach out to an attorney, chances are the attorney is going to tell you do not speak with the defendant's insurance company because anything you say is going to be used against you. If you don't know that, you're going to give a statement that potentially could hurt you later on. The other thing is you want to know what kind of coverage the other party has. So if the defendant driver has a $35,000 policy and you went to the hospital and you have serious injuries, fractures or anything of that nature, your case is going to be worth a lot more than the $35,000. So a lot of times if the defendant's insurance company knows that you have serious injuries, they will make you an offer to try to settle the case before it gets anywhere. Don't fall for that trick. Two reasons. One, you don't want to sign a release and give up your rights against the other driver because you don't know if the other driver has assets or anything else that you can go after, number one. Number two, if you do not get permission from your own insurance company to accept the settlement from the defendant driver, you basically give up your right to pursue a UIM or UM claim. So be very careful with that. Insurance companies have to give you approval before you accept the tortfeasor or the defendant driver's policy limits in order for you to be able to move forward with a UIM claim. So you lose nothing by consulting with an attorney. We get paid only if we are successful for you. If we're not successful, you owe us absolutely nothing for legal fees. So reach out to an attorney, understand what your rights are, and at that point, you can make a determination as to whether you want to proceed with a case if you have the injuries or not. You're not going to lose anything.
That is some excellent information, Joe. Thank you. And that is it for today's episode of Crash Course Injury Law with Joe Ghabour. To learn more about UM and UIM coverage and how it can protect you after an accident, visit ghabourlaw.com. You'll find clear resources to help you understand your policy and your rights. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.